Yesterday I rambled quite a bit about this kind of it was a ramble. So it was about the new director of an upcoming Daisy Ridley Star Wars film about her Jedi Order, where all her students get great powers without having to train. Sorry, no, but she had mentioned that it's 2024. Not Daisy Ridley, but the director, the activist director who Disney has put in charge of this. She mentioned that it's 2024, so it's about time that a female that a woman, sorry, I was going to say a female director, but it's not just a director, it's a woman in general, was shaping the future of Star Wars. Now, I said that was funny and a little ironic, given that Kathleen Kennedy, who last time I checked is a woman, has been directing the future of Star Wars for a really long time now, with mixed results. And my point of in that part of the ramble is simply that I don't think it's about men or women. I don't think we need to, I don't think that the success of Andor is because Tony Gilroy is a man. I just think he's really good at what he does. And that if I were in charge of Star Wars, rather than say, oh, we need to make this more, more appealing to women or more appealing to men or whatever, would just be that we need to find really, really solid directors, writers. We need to find the best people. We need to see Star Wars. Although this is not always true, because some of the Star Wars Disney Plus shows have had terrible costumes and special effects. But Star Wars has traditionally been quite good at things like costume, special effects, all the technical stuff. Whether under Disney or under Lucasfilm in the George Lucas days, technically they've been spearheading a lot of the technological innovation that we've seen in the film industry. The sound design, all of that stuff. So I would like them to just pick quality people in the writing department, quality people who, again, my impulse is always to say who really care about Star Wars, but that's not necessarily true, because Tony Gilroy, who created Andor, specifically hired people who were not super fans of Star Wars to make Andor. And yet somehow it managed to be the most Star Wars-y thing, other than maybe The Mandalorian, that's come out of Disney since they acquired Lucasfilm. But one thing that I talked about in that video, and that I sort of made the focus of my video headline and all of that, is the theory of the half-interested girlfriend. And I wanted to talk about that a little bit more, because I didn't go into a lot of detail about that. But what I started thinking about was my ex-girlfriend. Terrible thing to do, right? To think about your exes, right? But I thought about, we watched a lot of these movies and shows together over the years. We were together for like 7 years. And she wasn't, she didn't play D&D, and she wasn't into comic books. And she was really, as far, like a lot of chicks, sorry if this comes across as really painting with broad strokes, but in my experience, like with a lot of chicks, they're not as into this stuff as the dudes are. I know in my gaming group, one of our, sometimes I DM, sometimes my buddy DMs, we're the main DMs in the group, and his wife occasionally plays with us. And she's pretty much the only chick. I dated a girl briefly who played with us a little bit, but she was only into it because she was into Critical Role and all those popular YouTube's, gaming phenomena. But and of course there's many girls who are into this stuff, but by and large, guys are more into this stuff. But still, I was able to watch a lot of these things with my now ex. We watched Game of Thrones. We watched The Avengers. We watched a lot of the early MCU stuff. We watched, we went to the Star Wars movies with my kids, and we all dressed up in costumes, and we did all this nerdy stuff. And then, before I started to get jaded or uninterested or lose a little bit of that connection to the MCU, or before I lost the spark, she did. Now, I'm not talking about our relationship, although that's also true. She stopped wanting to. She lost interest in the new Marvel movies. She didn't. After a couple of the DC movies, she was done. I've talked to her since, and she hasn't even. She tried House of the Dragon, couldn't really get into it. we're not going to talk about the House of the Dragon's great. That's not part of my critique here. But my overall critique is that this half-interested girlfriend effect is real. And I know that a lot of guys out there, whether it's their wives, their girlfriends, their families, whatever, know what I'm talking about, which is that they might be really into this stuff, but they kind of have to drag their girlfriends with them to these movies or whatever. That's less and less true because as as this entertainment industry has become more, in tune with nerd culture, as these things like D&D and superhero comic books and comic book movies and fantasy like Game of Thrones, as all of that has become popularized and mainstreamed, of course, more and more people outside of where we all come from, from that playing D&D at lunch at junior high, and I was going to say, and getting made fun of or picked on by the jocks, but I was also a jock, so that never happened. But I wasn't really a jock, I guess, but I was an athlete. Anyways, it's still true, even though that has become mainstream, even though that has become popularized, it is still true that guys generally like this stuff more than girls. But when it's really good, like with the Avengers and the Endgame stuff and the first 5 or 6 seasons of Game of Thrones, when it's really good, your girlfriend wants to go to the movies with you. She wants to be involved in all this stuff. She isn't, off doing her thing while you're watching Game of Thrones because Game of Thrones is so good. And some of that, obviously, is also because, shows or stories, books, shows like Game of Thrones or the Marvel movies, all that stuff, they have a good blend of male and female characters. It's not just a bunch of dudes on the screen, whatever. I don't know. Personally, I don't think that most guys want to watch things that are just a bunch of dudes, although it's fine. Like 1917 is a great movie, and there's pretty much no women in that movie. And that's fine because it's a war movie about World War I. But I think a lot of guys also very much enjoy watching stuff like Arcane on Netflix, which, has the main characters are chicks. The point is, when you have quality material that isn't just geared at bringing women over, but it's just quality material, it's good enough that it appeals to the core fan base and it appeals to the half-interested girlfriends and wives and everybody that want to come along to the movies now. That's where the money is, right? Somebody said on Twitter, I think, somebody said somewhere, they likened this, when I was discussing it, they likened it to kids' movies that also appeal to grownups, like Shrek, like movies where there's enough grown-up humor that might go over the kids' heads to bring the grownups to the movies also. Now, see, the problem is if you took those kids' movies and you decided that you were only going to appeal to the grownups, so you really wanted to push the grown-up stuff to the point where the kids stopped losing interest, well, then you've got this sort of half-baked product because it's supposed to be for kids, but it's now geared towards grown-ups so much that maybe the kids aren't interested anymore. But it's also not a grown-up cartoon or grown-up movie, right? Adults want to go watch something, much more along the lines of what they would normally, they want to go watch BoJack Horseman or whatever. So you have this thing that doesn't have a demographic anymore. It's tried to appeal so much to so many people that there's no longer a core demographic to draw everybody else in. Right, that magnet, that lodestone that draws the other audience, the fringe audience in. And so what you've seen with Marvel properties is they've become, as they try to do stuff that's more and more sort of alienating to the core audience, I don't think that the fringe audience are sticking around. And again, I say this because, even as Marvel moved more and more towards stuff that was theoretically supposed to appeal more to women, like She-Hulk and the Marvels and all that, people like my ex-girlfriend stopped watching. I stopped watching. I stopped watching these things later. I kept watching because I'm a core fan, right? Core fans stick around and they bitch endlessly, but they stick around while the half-interested people drift away. And that's because you're no longer trying to make a product that appeals to the core fan base who bring everybody else to the yard. So I guess that's kind of my theory here. I don't think the problem at its core, a lot of people and a lot of YouTubers have said, this is all a problem of like the message, or everything's so woke now. I don't think Disney as a company is woke. I think that's a vast simplification and misunderstanding of what motivates giant corporations. Disney is trying to make lots of money. They want to make all the money. And in their, misguided attempt to make all the money, they have turned to this vision of diversity and inclusion that is a noble effort, but is not always spearheaded by the right people. So this sort of an organic move towards more diversity would simply mean we have more women, more people of color in movies, in TV shows, and we have more stories that are diverse and tell stories from different, cultural backgrounds. Inorganic diversity and inclusion is when you have a script like She-Hulk, which is just so forced and artificial and fake. Or when you have a lot of tokenism and you just, you replace white characters with black characters instead of creating new characters that are black. I'm not against race swapping completely. I think it has its time and place, but it does start to feel like tokenism and what I've called in the past corporate diversity. And I think that people can smell that. They can smell when something's inauthentic, when it's just being done for money. And I think that what a lot of people are seeing when they're outside of just the rigid and rancorous ideological culture wars and people, calling everything they don't like or everything with any sort of liberal values or LGBTQ stuff woke, which I think is a nonsense use of that word. Outside of that, I think is that a lot of people who are not necessarily very ideological in general, who don't really pay that much of attention to politics, are sensing this inauthenticity. And that is a turnoff. Just having any kind of political message wedged into a show where it doesn't really belong, or done in sort of a ham-fisted manner, when it's cheesy, when it's corny, when it feels like it doesn't really belong there, but they try to shove it in there. That rubs people the wrong way, even if they don't know how to articulate what it is that's bothering them. And that's why I think a lot of people have turned to just saying, well, it's woke. It's an easy word to catch all, describe things you don't like. I think it's fantastically stupid, but I understand why people use it. So yeah, what I would do, right? I can't just complain. I have to have alternative solutions. I think that I'm going to bring up Andor again because I think it's a great example. Maybe it's not everybody's cup of tea, but I think it's a great example of focusing on writing and attention to detail, because that show, they did a great job casting. The script is phenomenal, from the dialogue to just, the different stories that are told, the settings. They had essentially four separate but tied together story arcs, and just the structure of that show is really brilliant. The costume design, the set design, it was all very understated but very, very Star Wars. And they managed to do all that without ever talking about the Force, without ever using, the Darth Vader theme, without ever talking about Luke Skywalker. A focus on quality, first and foremost. That's what's fundamentally the most important thing. And I know that's easier said than done, but what we've seen in Star Wars, for instance, is not just like this attempt to make everything really progressive or woke or whatever, but it's this lack of planning, this lack of quality control, maybe too much faith placed in individual directors or producers like J.J. Abrams or Rian Johnson, where instead there should be, a plan. I think the Star Wars sequel trilogy doesn't suffer from, any of the things people might identify as like overly woke stuff, but I think it does suffer from a lack of planning. We have a trilogy that they could have planned ahead of time, and instead it's this mishmash of different people's ideas that have no cohesive glue, that it ends up ultimately rushed and kind of hack job in the end, with Palpatine coming, all this nonsense. I'm not even going to go there. and Star Wars itself is just it. I don't know if it needs a reboot or what, because then on the other side you have like the Filoni-verse, and people are huge Dave Filoni fans. But from what I've seen is the more we move into the Filoni-verse, with Ahsoka, with Mandalorian Season 3, the more we get into a totally different wing of Star Wars that I'm not sure is going to appeal to a lot of people. I know there is a very rabid fan base for Clone Wars and Rebels and all that, but I'm not sure that's going to appeal to a lot of people, because it's just you have so much catch up to do, which is a huge problem with Marvel and the MCU. It's just how much you have to pay attention to. And I think maybe the answer here is to tell more stories that don't have to connect so closely to all the other stories, and focus on, although still with a larger plan in mind, and focus on just hiring the best people you can, not because we need a woman to shape the future of Star Wars, but because we need people who have good ideas to shape the future of Star Wars. We need people who have an understanding of storytelling and who want to tell great stories to shape the future of Star Wars. We need to get back to basics with Marvel. We need to get back to basics with what made Star Wars tick. And what is that? It's a hero's journey. It's a story about, it's a space opera. It's a story about characters that we love and that we connect to and that we care about. And that's something I think maybe fundamentally with the sequel trilogy that we really, really didn't get was the creation of an adventuring group. Han and Luke and Leia and Chewbacca and C-3PO and R2-D2, like that was a group. That's a fantasy party in your space opera D&D game, right? That's people who are mostly just very fun to spend time with, who all have their little flaws, but nothing major. I mean, this is not a serious work of or tragic fiction or whatever. But in the sequel trilogy, Rey and Poe and Finn barely even got time together. Really not even in the first movie all that much. So none of it was really earned in the end. All that friendship felt forced. And I'm really rambling now. I realize this. So, just to sort of wrap things up, fundamentally, I keep using that word, I'm sorry. Ultimately, in conclusion, but really, I understand the need to appeal to wider audiences than just the geeks that used to build Star Wars models in their parents' basement. I understand, and I agree that things like Game of Thrones and popularizing fantasy, science fiction, space opera, D&D, all that stuff, that's all very healthy and good and sensible, and from every perspective, from a hobbyist perspective, from a business perspective, from an entertainment perspective, it's good to expand those things to reach wider audiences and to tell more stories from more cultural backgrounds, to have more people involved in the process, to have more women and more minorities and more people from other countries. And we're not all American, right? And just all of that. Old people, young people, everybody. By the time I'm older than I am, old man, this stuff has kind of been around for decades in the popular culture. And of course it's going to change and evolve and expand. But to do that right, you still have to look at what makes it work and what makes it work for what's brought it here in the first place. And I'm not saying you just have to only appeal to those hardcore fans, because a lot of them are angry and bitter and they're gatekeepers and whatever else, right? But so are a lot of the newcomers. They're gatekeepers too. They want to change everything about this stuff and make it fit their vision of what it ought to be, and that's exclusionary also. And so what we really need is we need to have stuff that appeals to the people that made this popular in the first place, and that can bring in the half-interested girlfriends, wives, parents, grandparents, yada yada yada. And who knows where we'll be in 15, 20 years, but I'm sure I'll be bitching about something then too. So thanks for watching. Like, subscribe, hit the notification bell. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Obviously, this is still something that I am attempting to articulate, and I haven't really fully got it down. I probably need to write something instead of just talking about it. But thank you for watching.